They left him hanging 3 days before I cut him down. The whole town passed by him, spinning slow from a telegraph pole, like some grotesque signpost of justice. Flies buzzed around the blackened bruises on his jaw. His shirt, once white, had long turned rust red from dried blood. They said he killed Sheriff Morrison's daughter. They said he confessed. They said he deserved worse. I stood on my store's porch each day and watched him swing. Folks drank coffee and gossiped as if his swollen body wasn't twisting in the wind 20 feet away. By the morning of the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I woke before dawn, packed a skinning knife, a quilt, and a canteen, and took my mule up the back trail to where he hung. I told myself it was just to bury him, that nobody deserved to be left like that, not even a killer. But truth was I hadn't seen death in his face. Not yet. The noose had bit deep into his neck, blistering the skin. But when I cut the rope and he crumpled to the ground, I heard it, barely a rattle in his chest, breath, alive. I stared at him, horrified. A man hanged 3 days in August sun should have been long gone, but this one was clinging to something. His hands were raw from the bindings they'd left him in. A brand fresh and still oozing had been burned into his shoulder. Murderer. He looked up at me. His one good eye fluttered. The other was purple, swollen shut. He couldn't speak, but I swear to God there was something pleading in the way. He looked at me, not fear, not even pain, just shame. I had no business getting involved. I'm a widow with debts and a general store to run. But I couldn't walk away. Not again. I hauled him onto the mule as best I could and led us both out of town, heading for the cabin my father built in the hills before the war. No one had been up there in years. It was far, quiet, forgotten, just like him. That ride took hours. He moaned once when I hit a rut, then passed out again. Every now and then I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting torches and dogs, but no one came. Maybe they figured he was dead. Maybe they wanted him to be Dot at the cabin I cleaned. Him up with boiled creek water and lye soap. He had bruises I couldn't explain, like he'd been beaten for days. His ribs stuck out like fence posts. I spooned broth into his mouth between moans. He kept slipping in and out, muttering nonsense, but one word came clear around midnight. Innocent. That was all he said. One word. Then silence. I sat beside him, watching the fire throw shadows on the log walls. I thought of Sarah Morrison, bright-eyed, always smiling when she came into my store. She used to buy licorice and ask about my late husband. She was kind, and she was dead. Could this man have done it? Could he have killed her and still cling to life like this, with a branded lie seared into his skin? Or was it the truth that was hanging in the wind? He didn't open his eyes until the 3rd day. By then, I'd changed his bandages twice and cleaned the wounds on his wrists and ankles where the ropes had cut down to bone. I was starting to believe he'd never speak again. That maybe saving him was only prolonging a slow death. But on that 3rd night, when the fire was down to embers and the wind howled through the chinks in the cabin walls, he stirred. I just laid down when I heard it barely above a whisper. Water. I scrambled to his side, nearly spilling the tin cup as I held it to his cracked lips. He drank slow. His hands shook, his eyes, both of them now open, though the left still swollen, locked onto mine, like he didn't know where he was. Or maybe he did and was trying to decide if I was a friend or another person come to hurt him. I didn't do it, he rasped. Didn't touch that girl. His voice was dry as a tomb. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pity, not yet, just curiosity, maybe hope. Then why'd you confess? I asked quietly, He didn't answer, just turned his head away and closed his eyes again. Over the next day, he spoke in fragments. A name Sarah croaked out like it pained him to say it. He mentioned a river, a scream, someone following her. His memories came in flashes, broken like glass after a gunshot. But one thing came through clear. He didn't run. He stayed. Tried to help. And then someone found him kneeling beside her body. The town never questioned it. I remembered the trial, or what passed for one. Sheriff Morrison stood on the saloon balcony and declared justice done. Said the killer had confessed. No one asked for proof. No lawyer came. The preacher didn't even speak at the hanging. His name was Thomas Creek, half Choctaw, half Scot, raised somewhere out west. Said he drifted into Millfield working cattle 2 weeks before Sarah died. Said she found him, came to him bruised, scared, whispering about someone watching her. Who? I asked Dot. He hesitated. She never said. That wasn't true. I saw it in his face. He was hiding something, not out of guilt, but fear. Maybe not for himself. Maybe for her. Back in town, the story had been simple. Drifter kills girl. Case closed. But Thomas didn't fit the picture. His eyes weren't cruel. They were haunted. I remembered the branding. Sheriff Morrison had ordered it himself. Said it would make sure God recognized him come Judgment Day. I began to wonder if that brand wasn't justice at all, but a warning to others. You're not safe, I told him as I changed his bandages again. If they find you, they'll finish what they started. He didn't argue, just stared into the flames, silent. I thought of my late husband, Peter, and what they did to him during the war for helping runaway slaves. Millfield had a history of looking the other way when blood was spilled for the right reasons. This wasn't the first injustice that town had buried. Maybe not even the worst. I made up my mind that night. I'd find out the truth. But I wouldn't just ask questions. I'd dig into Sarah's life, into the people close to her, the ones no one dared accuse. I just hoped I could do it before they caught wind that Thomas Creek was still breathing. It started with a ribbon, a small thing, really. Pale blue, frayed at the edge, tucked into the lining of the satchel Sarah used to carry when she came to the store. I remembered it clear as day. It matched her eyes, and she used to tie it in. Her hair, she left it on the counter once, weeks before she died. I kept it by the register in case she came back for it. She never did. That ribbon was still there, stuffed in a drawer beneath invoices and spare change. And that's where I started. I asked around quietly. Not too much. Just enough to see who squirmed when I brought up Sarah. Most folks acted like she was a memory they'd rather not disturb. Some got downright annoyed. But the one who got flustered real. Flustered was Deputy Jackson Wright. He was the sheriff's golden boy. Strong jaw, pressed uniform, always tipping his hat to ladies. Too clean, too polite. I never liked him. Sarah didn't either. She told me once he gave her the creeps, that he was always hanging around her pa's office when she came to bring lunch. Always too close, she'd said. Back then, I thought maybe he just had a crush. Now I wasn't so sure. At church that Sunday, I watched him shake hands and smile, but his eyes kept drifting like he was watching for someone watching him. That night, back in the cabin, I asked Thomas again, was it right? The one following her? He looked away, jaw tight. She was scared of him, he said at last. Said he wouldn't take no for an answer. Said he'd threatened to tell lies if she didn't smile more. Did she go to her father? She tried. Sheriff brushed it off. Said Jackson was just enthusiastic. Said she should be grateful someone wanted to marry her. God. The sheriff. Sarah's own father. He'd ignored it. Maybe couldn't imagine his own deputy doing something dark. Or maybe he didn't care. Protecting the badge mattered more than protecting blood. She came to me the night she died, Thomas whispered, bruised up. Said she'd finally told Wright she'd report him. Said she was scared he'd hurt her. I told her to stay the night. I made a fire, gave her stew. I never touched her. He stared into the dark corner of the room like he was seeing it all again. She went outside to breathe. I heard a shout. By the time I got to her, she was on the ground, bleeding. Someone ran into the trees. I chased him, but I lost him in the dark. When I came back, she was gone. His voice broke. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. And if what he said was true, then the killer wasn't some faceless monster. It was the man who still carried a badge. The man who likely helped string Thomas up. The man who now smiled at me every Sunday. I couldn't sit still. That night, I wrote a letter to an old friend and Dry Fork circuit judge I once sold flour and coffee to back when he was just a lawyer with no clients. I didn't name names, just hinted I had evidence worth seeing. I knew he wouldn't come quick. I needed time, but I needed proof more so I made a choice that could get me killed. I'd break into Jackson Wright's house. Breaking into a lawman's house feels different than breaking into anyone else's. It ain't just the risk, it's the weight of it. Like crossing some invisible line between brave and stupid. But I crossed that line the moment I decided to keep Thomas alive. This was just following it to its end. I waited until Thursday night. Jackson always played poker in the saloon with the mayor and 2 ranchers on Thursdays. He drank too much, laughed too loud, and usually stumbled home around midnight. That gave me maybe 2 hours. I wore black, tied my hair back, and slipped out just after dark. I cut across Widow Hannigan's orchard, then through the creek bed behind the livery to reach the edge of town. His place sat near the bluff, modest, single-story, but freshly painted. Looked respectable, just like the man who lived in it. Crept around the back, eased the window open with a butter knife I'd filed thin. It gave with a soft creak. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Inside, the house smelled like gun oil and sour sweat. Sparse furniture. Neat, but not lived in. Like someone playing house for appearance's sake. I searched the kitchen first, nothing. Then the front room. I was nearly ready to give up when I found a small desk tucked behind the bookcase. Locked. Of course, I pried the drawer with a flat hairpin. It snapped. I tried the second pin. It gave with a tiny pop. Inside were letters bundled together and bound with a leather cord. I opened the first one. My blood ran cold. It was from Sarah. Her handwriting, her words. Begging him to leave her alone. Telling him to stop watching. Her. If you love me, you'll stop, she wrote. If you don't, I'll tell my father. Another letter. Torn, stained with ink. His response. The words made my stomach churn. If you tell anyone, no one will believe you. You're just a girl. I'm the badge. At the bottom of the drawer, I found something worse. A small silver locket. I recognized it instantly. Sarah wore it every day in my store. It held a tiny photo of her mother inside. Her father gave it to her on her 10th birthday. She never took it off. I opened it. Inside was a smudge of dried blood. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to throw it across the room. But I forced myself to stay calm. I wrapped the letters and the locket in cloth and tucked them into my coat. Then I turned to leave and froze bootsteps. On the porch, the door opened. I ducked behind the bookcase, heart hammering. Jackson's voice rang out. Honey, you forget something? Silence. Then a low chuckle. Guess not. Just me and the whiskey tonight. He walked right past the bookcase and into the kitchen. I waited, every muscle aching, while he poured himself a drink. The minutes dragged like hours. Finally, he stumbled into the bedroom. I didn't wait. I crawled to the window and slipped out, landing hard in the dirt. I ran, didn't stop until I reached the tree line. Back at the cabin, I burst in, gasping. Thomas sat up, startled. What happened? I unwrapped the cloth and laid the evidence in front of him. Proof, I whispered. We've got it. But we weren't safe yet. I'd left the drawer ajar. If Wright looked, he'd know someone had been there. He'd know someone had the letters. And he'd come looking. Before dawn, we packed everything we had. I saddled the mule, helped Thomas into the saddle despite his weak legs, and covered our tracks as best I could. We were out of time. Wright would come. For us, and next time he wouldn't bring rope. We didn't make it far before the first shot rang out. It whistled past my ear and slammed into a pine just ahead. Thomas nearly fell from the mule. I yanked the reins and veered off the trail, diving into the brush. Another shot cracked through the air, this one closer. I heard horses. At least 3, maybe more. They found us, Thomas rasped. No, I said, pulling him off the saddle. They hunted us. We crawled through the undergrowth, limbs scratching our faces and arms. I led him to an old game trail that snaked behind a dry creek bed and up into the hills toward my father's old root cellar. Built before the war. It was more like a small underground bunker than a food store. He'd carved it into the base of a shale bluff, reinforced it with timber, and packed it with rock salt and grain until he died. I hadn't been there in years, but it was the only place I knew that could hide us. We slipped inside just as dusk fell. I pulled the door shut and braced it from within. The air inside was cool and thick, with the smell of old earth and decay. We stayed silent for hours. I could hear them above, hooves crunching dry leaves, voices barking orders. One of them was Jackson Wright. Fan out, they couldn't have gone far. That mule was still warm. Thomas sat slumped in the corner, clutching his side where the fall had reopened an old wound. I pressed a cloth to it, trying not to panic. They won't find us, I whispered. Not if we stay quiet? He looked at me, weak but clear-eyed. You didn't have to do this. I smiled grimly. You're right. I didn't. When the voices finally drifted off, I let us breathe again. But we knew it was temporary. They'd be back. Wright wouldn't give up until he had those letters, and until Thomas was dead for real this time. We need to get out of this valley, I said. Take the diary and the locket to someone who can actually do something. Someone from outside. Thomas nodded. Federal Marshal. There's one in Red Bluff. 3 days' ride. 3 days. If we had horses, we've got 1 mule. And I can barely walk. We sat in silence. I could hear the creek outside gurgling in the dark, mocking us. Then I remembered something my father told me when I was a girl. There's a way, I said slowly. The caves. Behind the cellar, the hill rose into a limestone bluff, riddled with old mining tunnels. My father and his brothers carved them out, looking for silver in their youth. They never found much, but the shafts ran deep. One of them opened up almost a mile north, near the old, dried-up mill road. If we could make it through, we could circle back to the trail without them seeing us. It's dark, I warned him. Twists like a drunk snake, but it's safer than open ground. Thomas nodded. Dark doesn't scare me. We lit a lantern and gathered our things. The evidence was wrapped in oilskin, tied tight to my back. I gave Thomas a makeshift crutch and helped him down the slope behind the cellar to the caves. Mouth. The air turned cold fast. Wet rock glistened like glass under the lantern light. Our shadows danced along the walls, and every creak echoed like thunder. We moved slow, careful, and still. Somewhere behind us, I swore I heard a voice echo, faintly down the shaft. "Don't stop," I whispered. We didn't. The cave spit us out into a meadow I hadn't seen since I was a girl. I used to come here with my father when we hunted deer. He called it God's front porch. Wide open, surrounded by tall grass and cottonwoods, with a clear view of the horizon. No hiding, no cover. Just light and silence. It was dawn when we emerged. The grass was silver with dew, and the sky was washed in pink. For a moment it felt like peace. Then I heard hoofbeats. I turned and saw them riders, at least half a dozen, cresting the ridge to the south. And at the front, his hat pulled low, riding like he owned the earth, was Deputy Jackson Wright. Thomas tried to stand. "We won't outrun them." "No," I said. "We won't." I looked at the bundle on my back, the diary, the letters, the locket, everything we had. And then I had an idea. A dangerous one, but maybe the only one left. "Give me your pistol," I said. He frowned but didn't argue. I tucked it into my waistband and walked into the center of the meadow. They saw me, slowed their horses, fanned out in the crescent. Wright trotted forward, calm as you please. His voice was smooth as polished stone. "Miss McKinnon," he said, smiling. "Didn't expect to find you out here on a morning stroll?" "I didn't." Smile, I pulled the locket from my coat and held it high. "You remember this?" I said, loud enough for the others to hear. "It belonged to Sarah Morrison. She never took it off. Funny how I found it in your desk." Wright's smile faltered. "Just for a second. You broke into my house?" "I did, and I found her letters, the ones where she begged you to leave her alone, where she told you to stop following her." The riders behind him shifted, uncomfortable. "You're lying," Wright said, jaw tight. "I've got her diary, too," I lied. "Every word, every page, including the part where she names you as the man who threatened to hurt her. That did it." The men glanced at each other. "You strung up an innocent man," I said. "Branded him, left him for dead. And you did it to cover your own sins." Wright's eyes went cold. "That's enough," he snapped. "Drop your weapons, now." He raised his rifle. And that's when Thomas stepped into the meadow behind me. He looked like hell-bandaged, pale, leaning heavy on a crutch, but he held something high in his hand. A worn, leather-bound book, the real diary. "You want it?" Thomas called out. "Come take it." The riders hesitated. One of them, young, maybe 20, lowered his gun. "What's going on, Jackson?" he asked. "She's lying," Wright barked. "They both are." "Then why is she holding Sarah's locket?" Another man asked. Wright panicked. I saw it in his eyes. He raised his rifle, aiming for Thomas. I moved first. I stepped in front of Thomas, drew the pistol from my waistband, and aimed it square at Jackson Wright's chest. "Try it," I said. His finger twitched. But then, one by one, the other riders lowered their guns. He looked around, realized he was alone. "You don't understand," he said, voice cracking. "She was mine. She said no. She was supposed to be mine." And there it was. Everything. We needed in front of God and 6 witnesses. I felt Thomas step up beside me. His hand brushed mine. We had our confession. Now we just had to survive long enough to make it count. For one long, breathless second, no one moved. The wind shifted the tall grass, birds scattered from the trees, and Jackson Wright stood at the center of it all, confession hanging in the air like smoke from a fire. His gun was still raised, his eyes flicking between us, between the men behind him. The noose was tightening, and he knew it. Then he did what cornered men always do. He pulled the trigger. I shoved Thomas sideways, and the shot missed wide, tearing through my coat sleeve. Gunfire erupted, screams, hooves, dirt exploding. Wright turned his horse, spurring it toward the trees, but one of the younger deputies, a boy named Ely, cut him off and fired. The shot hit Wright in the shoulder. He spun from the saddle, crashing into the ground with a sickening thud. Thomas crawled toward the diary as bullets zipped past, shielding it with his body. I ducked behind a log, pistol trembling in my hand. Two of Wright's loyal men kept shooting, wild and blind, until one of them caught a bullet in the chest and slumped off his horse. The other dropped his rifle and bolted into the trees. Silence fell, just the rustle of wind and the soft whimper of a dying horse. Wright lay groaning in the grass, blood blooming beneath him. I walked to him slowly, heart pounding. He looked up at me with hate so pure it curdled the air. "You think you've won," he hissed. "But justice don't matter out here. Truth don't matter." It never did. I knelt beside him, lowered my voice. Then it's time that changed. He died with his eyes open, mouth twisted, still choking on his own righteousness. Eli approached, wide-eyed, rifle slack in his hands. "Is it true?" he asked. "All of it?" Thomas stood behind me, leaning hard on his crutch, face pale but steady. "It's in the diary, her own words, everything." Another writer, Sheriff Morrison's cousin, I think, picked up the book and flipped through it, reading in silence. His mouth tightened. "We have to bring this to the sheriff," he muttered. "This'll burn the whole damn town down." "Good," I said. "That we buried Wright where he fell?" "No prayers, no marker. Back at the cabin I packed the rest of our things. We had no more need for hiding. The truth was out, and enough men had heard it to keep it from being buried again." Thomas sat on the porch as I cinched the mule's saddle. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. "You planning on heading to Red Bluff?" He nodded. "Need to give the diary to the marshal myself. Make sure it doesn't vanish." I shrugged. "I've never been to Red Bluff." He smiled. It was tired, crooked, but real. We left that meadow behind us, the cabin, the cellar, the ghosts, all of it. And ahead of us, a road, long, dusty, honest. We reached Red Bluff 2 days later. The marshal's office sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with iron bars on the windows and a tired-looking flag flapping out front. Thomas walked in ahead of me, shoulders square, the diary clutched tight in his hand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Marshal Gaines was older than I expected, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much. He read every word in Sarah's diary without interruption, every page, every name. When he reached the last entry, he leaned back and blew out a long, slow breath. "Sheriff Morrison's girl, huh?" Thomas nodded. "And the deputy?" "Dead," I said. "Shot while resisting arrest." Gaines studied us a long time before speaking. "You're lucky you made it here alive. Most don't, when law turns on itself." He stood, walked to the safe, and placed the diary inside. "This doesn't get buried," he said. "You have my word." We left his office lighter but not untouched. Some stains don't wash out easy. We stayed in Red Bluff a few days while Thomas healed. Word of Wright's confession and Sarah's letters spread faster than fire in dry grass. By the time Sheriff Morrison arrived, the town was waiting for answers. The crowd was quiet as he walked into the marshal's office. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching his every move. He came back out an hour later, face pale, hands shaking. I expected anger, rage maybe, but he just looked broken. "She tried to tell me," he said, voice raw. "My own daughter. And I failed her." He sat on the steps beside me, eyes fixed on the dust blowing down the street. "I loved "That girl more than anything," he said, and I still managed to let the devil walk right beside her. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Morrison resigned a week later, retreated to a quiet piece of land near the river, where no one would ask him to wear a badge or bury another child. They exonerated Thomas officially, wiped his name from every record, though no paper could erase what he'd been through. The brand on his shoulder would fade with time, but it would never disappear completely. One afternoon, we sat on the ridge above Red Bluff, watching wagons roll in along the river trail. He held a tin cup of coffee, steam curling into the air. "Between us, you ever think about going back?" he asked. I shook my head. "Millfield's not home anymore. Where is?" I looked out over the hills, the trees, the sky. Anywhere they don't hang a man before asking questions. He chuckled deep and warm. "What about you?" I asked. He looked down at the scar on his wrist. "I've been running so long, I forgot what staying feels like." I reached over and touched his hand. It was warm, solid, real. "Maybe it's time you remembered." He looked at me then, really looked, and nodded. Slow dot. We stayed up there until the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold. Two people who shouldn't have known each other. Two survivors. Not quite whole, but no longer broken. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it's just two hands pulling a man off a rope and deciding not to let go.